talking tonight about these government health care plans that you've proposed in one form or another. This is a show of hands question, and hold them up for a moment so people can see. Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants. Okay. Let me start with you, Mayor Buttigieg. Why?
The Democratic Party in the United States has basically declared itself the party of open borders. The borders and the enforcement of existing laws are openly called inhumane, racist, and most of all, evil by most of the rank and file of the party. And now there are even calls for the elimination of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Department in the United States. It's almost taken as a given that the border cannot be controlled and that to even try in itself is an act of exclusion. In fact, this sentiment and the simply maniacal emotionalism of a border being something that keeps people out, that separates families, that tortures children, is also peddled by much of the mainstream media. But while there is only one narrative on borders coming out of the Democratic Party and outlets like CNN and the New York Times, among others, borders, while having a function of exclusion, also serve to limit the power of other states. And while many will exclaim, "No Trump, no wall, no USA at all," in point of fact, more borders is exactly what the world needs. The US, like the EU and several other countries, are destinations for endless mass immigration. Immigration that is being encouraged by their respective governments via rights, welfare, education, housing, healthcare, and other encouragements to both legal and, more importantly, illegal migrants. On the US border, children are being bought, sold, rented, recycled, and kidnapped, mostly by men from Central America, as they know that this will gain them quick release and access to the country after illegally crossing the border. Kevin McAleenan, acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, recently said that we've seen all manner of smuggling organizations communicating to potential customers and those crossing the border how to bring children with them to be allowed to stay in the United States. And he continued, they've been active in advertising literally on Facebook and on the radio in Central America. He also reiterated a recent case of a 51-year-old illegal alien who had purchased a 6-month-old baby for $80 in Guatemala so that he could easily get into the United States. The man, a Honduran national, confessed to border agents when he was faced with a DNA test. This trafficking of children, many of which will then be prostituted out in the United States, is being aided and abetted as well as being encouraged by the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Democratic Party, as it is known around the world that if you arrive in the United States illegally, you will be released quickly if you are traveling with a child. In their rush to virtue signal, the Democratic Party, the mainstream media, and the other usual suspects have created a humanitarian crisis on the border with a tidal wave of child victims. With the only thought being on emotional optics, borders are painted as inhumane, when actually borders are what used to be used to keep communities and children safe. Consider the idea that borders not only exclude people and goods, but also limit the territorial extent of state actors. The hard border of the DMZ separates the totalitarian dictatorship of North Korea from the democratic South Korea. This border limits the ability of North Korea, its secret police, its failed economic system, its poverty and routine famines from spilling over into its southern neighbor. The DMZ protects South Korea from the police state that is North Korea and has allowed their economy to grow to a size where it now dwarfs its northern neighbor. Hard borders can contain the chaos of neighboring states. Israel built a wall, and in doing so, it reduced the incidences of suicide bombing in its territory to almost zero. While many in Europe and the US call it an apartheid fence, This kind of language is a common tactic used by those that espouse open borders, as they constantly deploy the same emotive language of detention centers being concentration camps that cage children and kill migrants. Borders, in the case of Israel, demonstrably save lives. As well, Israel and Turkey both have a hard border with Syria, and this has saved both of their countries and their people from joining the dark fate of the Syrian people who have been locked in a multi-sided armed conflict for over 8 years now. These hard borders protect their people from allowing war and chaos from spilling into their countries. The borders of Brazil and Colombia have effectively stopped the spread of Venezuelan socialism that has crippled that country and led to mass poverty and food shortages. The fact that the nation is bordered by 2 other countries that have abundant food and materials available actually acts as a lifeline to the people still living in that crumbling nation. Thus, these borders act as a buffer to contain the failed economic policies that have reduced Venezuela to one where people literally storm zoos looking for food. And in having borders, their countries are now acting as a kind of supply chain to the people whose government chose the wrong social and economic systems. Borders at times can act as a lifeline or lifeboat to neighboring countries. Closer to home and even within the same nation-state borders work to limit the power of government. In Nebraska, you can be imprisoned for possessing marijuana and even killed should police believe that you are resisting them. In Colorado, the state's constitution allows for the possession of marijuana and you will not be arrested, risk death, or be imprisoned. In a very real sense, the Colorado border contains Nebraskan ideology as well as Nebraska's war on drugs. The Mediterranean Sea, until very recent times, limited the ability of people to move from North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa to Europe. Different nations with different ways of life are retained because of borders, not in spite of them. They have, for many years previously, limited the ability of people to be executed for such things as blasphemy, apostasy, or sorcery in Europe. But like on the Mexican border with the US, the inducements and benefits of the welfare states of Western Europe and the open borders of the continent are acting like a magnet for migrants. Now there is even a taxi service in the form of NGOs that assist in the people smuggling that hover off the coast of Libya and traffic migrants by their thousands into Europe. Both the EU and the US are now seeing the fruits of open borders, and unless the current decisions on borders that are based on hysterical emotive language are not brought under control and dispassionate logic brought to bear, both the US and many of the states in Western Europe will continue to politically and socially polarize. The maladies, problems, politics, even diseases are all being absorbed into destination countries with soft and open borders, just as one would expect. Of course, people should be allowed to leave their countries, but that does not make access to the nations of the West for all the people of the planet a universal human right. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore are all wealthy nations, but they have not lost control of their borders. Borders do not only exclude people, but they limit the spread of bad policy, bad ideas, bad ideologies, bad practices, as well as giving the people living within the ability to determine their own destiny and their own way of life. For a truly diverse world, one that has diversity of thought and ways of life, more, not less borders are needed. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this kind of material, please consider subscribing. Also, hit the alert bell to be notified when new uploads are made. Also, please consider heading over to BitChute, links are in the description, and subscribing to my channel over there. It is a censorship-free platform, and there will be videos uploaded exclusively to my BitChute account. Thanks very much, and I'll see you again soon.